Okay, but we have here. So, great. I'll now call the March 13th, 2024 Air Quality Control Board meeting to order at 5:30. Ms. Estiarmijo, would you please call the roll and record whether each member is in attendance?
Member Armijo?
Present.
Member Kalman?
Here.
Member Eberline? Member Grudowski?
Here.
Vice Chair Richards?
Present.
Chair Paul?
Here. So we have everyone here, just two of us on Zoom and a quorum. So a few brief housekeeping notes, as always, before we begin. I'd like to remind everyone that this is a hybrid meeting, which brings with it the possibility of technical difficulties. Please know we're committed to making our meetings accessible to everyone, including those who can't attend in person, and we'll do everything we can to make sure everyone is able to fully participate in tonight's meeting. I'd also like to discuss public comment, which is covered in the agenda. The Air Quality Control Board will hear general public comments and comments on specific agenda items during tonight's meeting. If you are attending the meeting in person, please sign up to speak by checking yes next to public comment and indicating whether you will be providing general comment or commenting on a specific agenda item on the meeting sign-in sheet provided by the Air Quality Control Board liaison. If you're attending tonight's meeting online, please use the chat function in Zoom to sign up to speak at any time during the meeting or raise your hand when the chair asks if anyone would like to give comment. If you're calling into the meeting and would like to provide a comment, press *9 to raise your hand. Commenters will be called on in the order they signed up to speak or raise their hand. Public comment will be limited to 5 minutes or less, depending on the number of commenters. Your time will start when you start speaking, and the chair will let you know when your time is concluded. Please note we'll only hear public comment during the 2 public comment opportunities on the agenda in an effort to keep the meeting running smoothly and efficiently. Comments on specific agenda items should be provided during the first public comment opportunity. If you would like the board to consider your comment when the item is heard, if you sign up to give comment on a specific agenda item, please state the item on which you're providing comment. Last year, we made a note on decorum. I want to remind folks to treat each other with respect. The number of the security guard upstairs is 505-924. 3777. Should you feel unsafe, please bring any incidents to my attention. So we can move right on to the consent agenda, which is our first item of business, or item 2 on our agenda. Pursuant to our consent agenda rule of order, we've identified 2 routine items to be heard on the consent agenda as not controversial or requiring discussion. That would be the approval of today's agenda and the approval of the February 14th, 2024 meeting minutes. Does any member of the board have an objection to the items on the consent agenda? Anyone online?
Yes, Chair Paul, I would like to request that we remove the February 14th, 2024 meeting minutes from the consent agenda into the actual agenda itself.
Great. How about we put it right after the approval of today's agenda? Just in the order it's already printed.
Sure, that would be fine. Thank you. 2 separate
votes. Okay, great. Okay, so that means we can identify, are there any other objections? I suppose we now have to do it in 2 steps. So if you have an objection, then that works out fine. Yeah, starting with the approval of today's agenda. Is there a motion to approve the items on today's agenda?
I so move.
Moved by member Armijo. Can I have a second?
I second that.
Seconded by member Eberline. Ms. Estiarmijo, would you call the roll?
Member Armijo?
Yes.
Member Kalman?
Yes.
Member Eberline?
Yes.
Member Grudowski?
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Chair Paul?
Yes, although I think items C and D are sort of the same item, so hopefully we can discuss them all in item C and then be able to consolidate those 2. Sounds like the agenda was approved. Sorry, Ms. Estiarmijo, did you get the votes there? I did not.
Madam Chair, the vote is 6 yes, 0 no, 0 absent, and 0 abstains.
Thank you. So the agenda is approved for today, and now we can move on to the approval of the February 14th, 2024 meeting minutes. Vice Chair Richards, you had some discussion around those.
Thank you, Chair Paul. Thank you very much, Ms. Estee Armijo, for taking these minutes. They were really comprehensive in terms of what council had said, but I didn't see anything reflecting the discussion of the board. Particularly, I think I pointed out at our last meeting some information that actually is provided in the transcript that Mr. Domenici provided, stating that my intent was reflected in the transcript in terms of there not needing to be a correction. I know that's sort of outside of our purview. We can't really discuss that because it's a Court of Appeals, but I would ask that you just review that statement and reflect that in the updated minutes, if you wouldn't mind.
So would this be a fair summary of your request that the board's discussion be more completely included in an edit of the February 14th minutes?
Yes, thank you, Chair Paul.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's a good idea. Any other discussion? Okay, so we'll leave the approval of those minutes to the next meeting once they're complete. Great. Okay, we can move on to item 3, our air program report. That's our next item of business. EHD has a presentation for us on the fugitive dust mitigation plan and the public comment period. Please go ahead, Mr. Smith.
All right, Chair Paul, members of the board, I'll wait for Anita to get that up, but just going to talk briefly about the fugitive dust mitigation plan that we're going to have out for public comment pretty soon.
One moment, please.
All right, so talk a little bit about the draft fugitive dust mitigation plan. Bernalillo County was mentioned by the EPA as one of the counties that is subject to mitigation plan requirements under the exceptional events rule. And Anita, if you could go to the next slide. Okay. So briefly, I'll talk about the Clean Air Act and the exceptional events rule areas subject to mitigation plan, as well as the requirements under 40 CFR 51-930. The review period for public comment period for the fugitive dust mitigation plan, as well as some of the measures that have been recommended. So if you go to the next slide. So under 40 CFR 51-930, mitigation of exceptional events, all states or local jurisdictions having areas with historically documented or known seasonal events shall be required to develop a mitigation plan with the components identified in 51-930B2 and submit a plan to the EPA according to those requirements. Next slide. So some of those requirements include public notification and education programs for affected or potentially affected communities, steps to identify, study, and implement mitigating measures, including approaches to address each of the following. That includes measures to abate or minimize contributing controllable sources of identified pollutants, methods to minimize public exposure to high concentrations of identified pollutants. Next slide. Processes to collect and maintain data pertinent to the event, mechanisms to consult with other air quality managers in the affected area regarding the appropriate responses to abate and minimize impacts, and provisions for periodic review and evaluation of the mitigation plan, its implementation and effectiveness by the state or local jurisdiction and interested stakeholders. Next slide. So 51 930 B2 3A, it talks about the public comment period for that plan, and it has to be at least 30 days. We plan to start that period. We've been working on the draft, and we plan to start that period around March 20th or 21st. And then we must submit those public comments received with the mitigation plan to the EPA, which is due by April 27th of this year. So the letter that we received was April 27th in 2022, and we have 2 years to develop a mitigation plan. Next slide. So with the submission to the EPA, we must respond to those comments and talk about any adjustments that we made. We must specify the review and evaluation process, which it is reviewed every 3 years. So generally the goal for this cycle is to talk about the fugitive dust regulation that we currently have in place, as well as mention some suggested control approaches. And then the hope is every 3 years, there's opportunities for more stakeholders to be involved and for improvements to be made to have a good proactive approach in place. And as I mentioned before, the states have 2 years to submit a plan after notification of being subject to mitigation plan requirements under the rule. Next slide. So some of the mandatory measures we have in place, 1120 under the New Mexico Administrative Code, fugitive dust control. We currently have a working group at EHD where we're looking at possible amendments to that rule. So we're currently evaluating ways to make it stronger, looking for areas that need improvement. And then the fugitive dust regulation part 20 includes programmatic and construction permits, and programmatic permits are required for areas totaling 3/4 of an acre or more, subject to routine maintenance, surface disturbance activities, or routine ongoing active operations. And then construction permits are required for active operations that disturb 3/4 of an acre or more, such as demolitions or renovation activities. Next slide. And construction permits are valid for 1 year. Programmatic permits are valid for 5. As part of the construction permit, it has to include the total volume of bulk material being handled, total area of disturbance, project description, anticipated project completion date, site map, high wind and contingency measures, and a description of stockpiles. And this is a very high level overview. I mean, the rule is pretty detailed. And so if you go through part 20, there's a lot in there, but this is kind of just a general overview. Next slide. Wait for me now. Okay. So there are a number of mandatory high wind control measures under part 20, and that includes wet suppression to try to maintain soil moisture, fabric fencing material around the perimeter of the disturbed surface area, use of chemical dust suppressants applied in the amounts, frequency, and rates recommended by the manufacturer, department approved alternative dust control measures equal to or better than the above measures as part of a permit amendment, stopping active operations that are capable of producing fugitive dust, particularly on days where winds exceed 30 miles an hour. And we did have a stop work order in place not too long ago on one of the high wind days. Next slide. And some of the voluntary measures, it's not required to address agricultural areas, but the Natural Resource Conservation Service under the Department of Agriculture does have a soil dust mitigation handbook that outlines some good measures, and that includes, for cropland, rangeland, natural areas, and unpaved surfaces, and that includes maintaining soil surface cover, agricultural practices aimed at improving soil health, in-field pass reductions from vehicles. Sorry for the misspelling there. Windbreaks and vegetative barriers and unpaved roadway management, trying to minimize disturbances and use natural approaches. Next slide. It also includes reduction of reliance on commercial fertilizers, land application of compost, and improved pasture and range management. And the New Mexico Department of Agriculture does offer a healthy soils program where soil and conservation districts can apply for grants to improve soil health. And the program can also distribute cover crop seed to local agricultural operations and help those land managers evaluate soil health and reduce the likelihood of erosion and dust formation. Next slide. And other recommendations include fire suppression efforts and invasive species management just to improve the ecosystem health, paving unpaved dirt roads, integrated vegetative management, which is a strategy from the Department of Transportation along right-of-way areas next to highways, and then soil crust stabilization, which can take a while. That biological crust stabilization, it can take a while to establish, but there's some interesting strategies out there that might be worth considering going forward. Next slide. And the plan does talk about the monitoring network in place. And Dwayne Salisbury could talk a little bit more about this, but their program operates 6 ambient air monitoring stations equipped with instrumentation to track windblown dust. Those stations measure meteorological parameters relevant to particulate matter transport, such as wind speed, wind direction, and temperature. And weather and data forecasts are monitored as well by EHD to determine conditions that are appropriate for health alerts and stop work orders. We do have a meteorologist on staff, Jeff Stone-Typer. So, next slide. And then the plan also talks about public education and outreach. So the department does have a fugitive dust training workshop twice a year for fugitive dust permit holders. It's really geared towards mostly, but it talks about the importance of controlling regulatory dust, regulatory provisions, permits, standard dust controls, alternatives and innovations to reduce dust. And EHD does participate in city events to educate the public as well from time to time. And we do have a high wind warning system and notification alert system in place. And I believe that's it. So I'll stand for any questions on that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions from the board? Member Eberline.
So in the beginning here, I heard a bunch of dates. It sounded like you're going to put this plan out for public comment like at the end of next week.
That's correct. Yeah. Hopefully next week we'll have it out for that 30-day public comment period.
And then it's going to be a 30-day public comment period. So then we end up like in mid to late April. And if did I understood it correctly that you're going to send it to EPA by the end of April, the 27th? Was that the date I heard?
It is a very tight timeline.
Yes,
that's a
I
good
was
point.
wondering, you have to respond to the public comments too, or you're assuming that you're not going to get any? Because I've never heard that you can get anything public comment responded to, or get the event, maybe getting the plan updated based on public comment. And in 5 days, you're going to get it to EPA. That sounds like, aren't you cutting it a little tight here?
I would agree. It was a tight timeline. We should have probably allowed a little more time, but we'll work hard to process the comments that come in and adequately address them. And perhaps the EPA may be a little bit flexible on that due date too. But we'll work to try to move things as efficiently as possible and be thorough as well. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Member Eberline. Other questions to the board? I should look online. Vice Chair Richards, is this pertinent to this? I know you might have other things to discuss. So is this pertinent to this? Because
Yes, it is.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Smith. So I had a similar comment than Member Eberline had. It seems like a really small amount of time to get this to EPA. And I was also wondering, given that, whether you would be presenting the important aspects of the plan that you have at our next board meeting to inform the board members?
So I know that this plan doesn't have to go through a hearing process and it's not part of the SIP. We could present some more information potentially, but we just encourage board members to take a look at the draft plan once it's out for public comment, to get the specifics.
Okay, I just know in the past, even though there hadn't been plans before hearing, that we've had a briefing on the reports. So it sounds like that policy might have changed a bit. That'd be great if it could be posted on the website so that the board members could actually look at the plan and
Yes.
also provide comment. My other question was, you mentioned you were evaluating regulation pertaining to the dust mitigation. What sorts of elements were those? The recommendations you just showed in your presentation, or are there other elements that you feel need to be strengthened or changed? Just a brief summary.
Yeah, so we still need to have those discussions internally. I know, there's been talk about potential requirement to cover stockpiles on construction sites. So it would be geared towards the activities that are subject to a fugitive dust permit under that rule. But we still need to have more discussion about that. So that's an ongoing discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you. My last comment was that a member of the South Valley had contacted me. I think it was February 27th, and the air quality showed good on your website. And then like 10 minutes afterwards, there was notification to the public to stay indoors for health reasons. And just pointing out the discrepancy between those two messages. So I don't know if you might take that back to your department and find a way that your public health alerts actually match what we're seeing in terms of the air quality alert, or not the air quality alert, but what you see on your air quality page in terms of whether or not the air quality is good, bad, or or other. I just received that comment. I wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll take it back with the people that work on the alert system and discuss more.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all I had, Chair.
Other questions from the board it sounds like Deputy Director Albrecht could address your question, Vice Chair Richards.
Vice Chair Richards, members of the board, on that specific date, typically when we call those health alerts, it is due to the excess winds that we see at that particular time. So prior to that, we did have good air quality, but we've got wind speed values over the threshold of 30 miles sustained. So you can have this 5 minutes, then you can get a rush of air coming in that can actually change the situation. And during those times, it usually takes us about an hour or so to evaluate that. So the discrepancy is the data you saw was probably from 11 o'clock, and then the winds came in very high, and it is a rule that at 30 miles an hour that there's a shutdown.
Does that help answer your question, Vice Chair?
I'm sorry, Deputy Director Albrecht, I was on mute. Thank you very much for that information.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions on the dust mitigation work? Okay, hearing none, I just have two quick ones, Mr. Smith. One is just, what are some examples of facilities that have routine rather than like construction-based one-time dust mitigation needs?
I'd probably have to get back with Tony, or yeah, Chris.
Not a dust expert myself.
Chair Paul, members of the board. The two programs that are within the fugitive dust are the programmatic permits, the construction permits. So if you look at the construction permits, I'll start with that first because it's easier to distinguish. It's very similar to the in NIPD. So anybody knows the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, it triggers it at 1 acre. The construction permits are triggered at 3/4 of an acre. And a lot of the mitigation strategies actually follow stormwater best management practices. So under the construction general permits for air, it is a one-time permit. And it's usually 1 year, but if the project extends out to a year, we will actually allow it, especially on big developments. So the programmatic permits are more routine. Good examples of that are some of the open parking lots that are not paved. So you'll get a lot of surface parking lots that are dirt or milled. We'll get a programmatic permit. Another good example is county roads. So if the Bernalillo County has county roads that they utilize on a constant basis, they will also get a programmatic permit. So it's kind of routine types of activities that you would get that for.
It's mostly roads.
It'll be roads, it'll be like a parking lot that is used long-term. Mesa also has a lot of parking lots that have millions of stuff on there. That's a good example. Typically, our programmatic permit holders are APS, Bernalillo County, City of Albuquerque, UNM. I think DOE and maybe DOD also have some of those programmatic permits. Basis a lot of open land where they utilize those acreages, but it needs to have some type of suppression. So they actually have to get a programmatic permit. And every 5 years, when the 5 years is up, the inspector will go out and inspect the facility and we'll rate it either no effect, basically there's no effect all the way to severe. And they will have to pay based on the severity of the evaluation of their project.
Thanks for informing me there a little bit about. I was curious because the construction seems obvious, but long term does.
Yeah, programmatic. This is something that this has been around for 22 years. So there's a lot of facilities that have had these permits for literally, they've had 4 cycles of 5 years.
Great. My other question was just if EHD consults with tribal nations in the airshed on dust mitigation that might impact them if it's nearby.
With travel.
Tribal nations.
Tribal.
Pueblo and Saleta and Sandia, I'm thinking of mostly.
Yeah. So what Alan was talking about, we just started our, what we call regulatory development committee, which is a kind of a off branch of control strategies. So we just started those meetings and the first one was actually the fugitive dust reg. So we've got a couple people that are assigned to do the research on it and all those things are on the table. Everything's on the table right now for that regulation.
Other questions on the board before we close? Member Armijo?
Yeah, I just have one question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you indicated there's like an hour lag time between a measurement and an actual alert. Is that what I heard?
Typical what will happen is we have a staff meteorologist. He actually was the National Weather Service forecaster for this area for many years. He evaluates when he sees the potential of high wind days, he will evaluate throughout the whole morning. So when winds start getting up, let's say 15, 20, that's when typically he'll know within an hour of whether it's going to be high or not. So we'll evaluate and then he'll hit a sustain of 30 miles an hour and then he'll call a health alert. And then what it does, it goes out to all the social medias after that. So there could be a half hour to an hour lag before it gets out.
Okay, I was just curious to see why it took so long. I guess that's why, because you got to get his blessing, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's part of it is a blessing, but the other part is actually evaluating, looking at, okay, it hit 30 miles sustained and go from there. So, and that particular instance on February 27th, which Vice Chair Richards mentioned, not quite sure, but I do know at the end of February, there was a health alert. So, and I was involved in all those.
And I don't want to get off this dust mitigation, but is that the same alert system for fire?
We use a lot of different outlooks. So we use a MailChimp, which is like an email server type thing. We use something called Rave, which actually hits people's phones, and then we'll go to all the social media platforms from there.
Okay.
So it takes a little bit to get to every one of those platforms.
What my concern is the time lag, and and I think you've addressed it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Member Galuski.
Just very briefly along those lines. Is the staff meteorologist basing that decision on observations of wind speeds or forecasted wind speeds, or is he looking at both?
He's using every possible methodology to him. Like I say, he's a trained meteorologist, so he looks at stuff individually on his own. He'll look at the National Weather Service has in place, but he'll also look at a lot of stuff. Like right now, he's looking at it because there's a couple really big fronts that are shooting off and they're all spawning off of each other. So we're already looking for tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
He's already looking probably a day or two ahead. He gives me a heads up saying by Thursday, he'll give us especially on like Friday, he'll say likely, unlikely, or likely. He'll tell us each day.
Great, thanks.
Thank you both. Any other maybe more general questions for EHD? I think I had one. Just wanted to check while we have you here, if you can tell us what's holding up council's contract. Because she's just,
I have no idea. I haven't been involved on here.
so you guys have signed it already?
I haven't been involved in it.
You haven't seen it yet?
I haven't been involved at all.
Knows.
It's at a higher pay grade than me. Yeah, I don't know where it is.
Okay. Vice Chair Richards.
This question might be better for Mr. Smith, but you may know also, Deputy Director Albrecht. We did now I'm spacing it, the report last month. It was the regional haze report. And I know there's public comment happening at present. Will that also be presented to the board before it goes forward? Do you know?
I'm gonna give it over to Alan.
Okay, thank you.
So you're talking about the public comment period for the SO2 milestone report?
Yes, that's correct.
It is on the website currently, and it's currently going through public comment.
Okay, the question was, will you be presenting that to the board, a summary of that, or is the same policy for us to read it on our own or to look it over and ask questions at some point?
We will be doing a brief presentation about the SO2 milestone at the next meeting for board approval, and then we'll get the determination about the milestones we've met to the EPA.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. That's all I had, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Member Eberlein.
Okay, so this was a question. I have a vague memory that last meeting, there was some discussions about that the EPA was going to change the PM 2.5, the annual number. And I saw some of these regulatory update things, and it seems like they have now sent out a 300-page bulletin about it, which I didn't look at. But what's the latest status on that, and what's the effect it's going to have on Lea County?
Eberlein, members of the board. Last week, March 6th, EPA published Federal Register the PM 2.5. So we have got 60 days. So May 6th, it'll be effective. So that is the latest on there. We thought it was going to be pushed down a little bit, but they actually moved on it pretty quickly. But we're right in the middle, in the very beginning starting points of looking at our data, evaluating our data, so we can give EPA next year, 2025, our recommendation of whether of our attainment status.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions from the board, I think we can move on to our next item of business, which is our first public comment opportunity. We will now hear public comment, and we'll start with general comments. I'd like to remind everyone to please state your name and affiliation for the record. We'd ask that commenters please try to keep their remarks to no more than 5 minutes. Ms. Esther Mijo, has anyone signed up to give general public comment?
Ms. Painter, do you have a general comment or a specific? Ms. Marla Painter.
I guess it's general. It's regarding Marla Painter, Mountain View neighborhood, members of the board. I guess it's a general comment. I just wanted, because I was going to bring it up anyway. these last windy days, in the last, I don't know, 6 weeks or so, our end of the valley is just covered in dust. I don't see any adherence to any fugitive dust policies at all. And it's, as you can hear in my voice, it's really dangerous and uncomfortable, and it's much more prevalent. As I'm driving down the freeway and then go down into the valley, it seems to me it's much more prevalent there than other parts, but maybe just as bad in the North Valley. Don't know. But I just would urge you to hold the Environment Department into account for making sure that people don't have to live with disproportionate amounts of this fugitive dust. And a lot of it comes from unpaved county shoulders of roads. Broadway, unbelievable mess when the high winds come along. And I even have to say, unfortunately, our local wildlife refuge, no dust control there. It's terrible. A lot of the agricultural lands that aren't being farmed currently, but a lot of it comes from shoulders from roads. So just want to make that comment and bring that to your attention. And I hope that we can hold the county, the ordinance more accountable to what's really out there as opposed to what we want to have be out there. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. It sounds like comments like that are ones that are helpful for the plan comment period. So perhaps that's something to submit in writing to Yashi. Are there any other general public comments?
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
All right. Do we have any? We'll now hear comments on specific agenda items. If you have a comment, please remember to state which agenda item you are commenting on. Has anyone signed up to give comment on any agenda items?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 3 for C, D, and E.
Okay, excellent.
So first up, Mr. Ken Ortiz for item C.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Ken Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of the New Mexico Auto Dealers Association. I just really appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you on item 5C. I'm urging you to adopt the motion for stay for the Advanced Clean Car 2 rules that become effective in less than 2 years. We feel that the rule as adopted will cause irreparable harm to the auto industry throughout New Mexico, as well as for the transportation needs for most New Mexicans. This regulation is the most dramatic change to the transportation for New Mexicans that we have seen in our lifetime. This rule will ripple throughout New Mexico for many years to come and will result in irreversible harm to New Mexico small businesses, jobs, and our transportation sector. Granting a stay is not expressing an opinion on the rules that were adopted. It is merely placing a pause on these rules until the New Mexico Court of Appeals has decided whether these rules should be adopted in New Mexico. Here in New Mexico, we have been studying the percentage of EVs and plug-in hybrids that are purchased in New Mexico. So, for example, in calendar year 2022, the combined average EV and plug-in hybrid market share was 3.51%. In 2023, we saw 2 months in September and October of 2023 where the EV market share was over 4%, with September at 4.4 and October at 4.3 respectively. This has so far been the high water mark of EV sales for the past 25 months. Since October, the average EV market share has now lowered back to 3.6%. In summary, over the last 25 months, we basically have not seen an increase in the market share of EVs. To get to 43% in 2 years, the market share would have to be increased by approximately 1,000% of where we are today. We all know this is impossible. And what these rules are doing is basically setting up New Mexico to fail, along with hurting our small businesses throughout New Mexico and jeopardizing jobs within our industry. Recently, over 5,000 dealerships across the U.S. sent letters to President Biden urging the EPA to adjust the proposed regulations pertaining to EVs and hybrids that the EPA is considering. Multiple major news outlets are reporting that President Biden is planning to lower the projections of EVs being sold due to the reality of the market. In addition, as a reminder, EPA has still not approved ACC2. During the hearing, we spoke extensively on the lack of EV infrastructure throughout New Mexico. There has been no evidence presented that the proper amount of infrastructure will be in place by 2026. One of the hurdles needed to adopt an administrative rule is if the rule is in the public's best interest. This was not proven during the hearing. There was no stakeholder meetings south of Albuquerque or in northwest New Mexico where it is predominantly rural in nature. Recently, the president of the Navajo Nation, Dr. Moon Nygren, sent a letter to Governor of New Mexico expressing his concerns with the adoption of ACC2. Some of President Nygren's concerns on how this rule will impact tribal families living in their respective reservations and rural communities, especially the terrain and driving conditions that tribal families face when their vehicles are loaded with supplies, livestock, and water, driving through unpaved roads throughout the year. President Nygren expressed concerns about the affordability and range of EVs, where most tribal members will not be able to afford them or have the ability to charge them, as some families do not have electricity in their home. One of the most glaring issues, which was discussed at length during the hearing, is that New Mexicans will be able to purchase their vehicles out of state and register them here in New Mexico. The Environment Department, under cross-examination, admitted that these vehicles purchased out of state will still be able to be registered in New Mexico. This rule will force New Mexicans to travel hundreds of miles to neighboring states to purchase the vehicle of the choice or a vehicle that they need and bring it into New Mexico. This issue is detrimental to New Mexico, where the state of New Mexico will lose tax revenue, and New Mexico small businesses and jobs will suffer accordingly. How does this help reduce emissions? Another hurdle to the adoption of this rule is that the rule is economically feasible. How can a rule be economically feasible if the vehicles that the government is mandating cost on average 10 to 15% more than traditional vehicles? This rule will cause new and used traditional vehicles to be more expensive than they already are due to the simple supply-demand equation.
Just so you know, Mr. Ortiz, you're 5 minutes now. I know we don't have too many comments, so I'm giving you a little bit of leeway as I did the previous commenter, but.
Thank you. I have one more.
Okay.
Incentives recently passed by the New Mexico legislature will be underutilized and will not move the needle due to how the mechanics of this tax credit works. The tax credit is not a cash on the hood incentive, despite what proponents of the bill labeled it as. The legislation requires proof of purchase or lease, along with proof of registration, to be presented to the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department in order to obtain a certificate of tax credit. This is not a discount or rebate at point of sale. This credit can only be used to offset tax liability upon filing. Very few dealers will accept this type of credit. This program will not work like the federal tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act, where the Internal Revenue Service issues a check within 48 hours. For these reasons, we feel that the recently adopted rule will cause irreparable harm to the residents and businesses of New Mexico, and we urge you to adopt the motion for stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz. Let's have our next commenter.
Mr. Carlos Garcia, for item D.
Madam Chair, members of the board, nice to see you all again after a little bit of a break. So I will be as brief as I can. I appreciate that you all hear public comment at your meetings. I'm here representing my company regarding item D, asking that the Air Board grant our motion for stay on the clean cars portion of ACC2. Granting a stay does not mean the Air Board is admitting it was wrong. It means the board believes that there are good reasons to wait to implement the regulation by allowing the legal merits of our case to play out in the Court of Appeals. It's clear that we have an excellent chance of winning our appeal, especially in light of what has occurred since our November hearing. Unlike the counsel for the EIB, Ms. Cedillo Lopez correctly told you all that you should vote on the 3 different portions of ACC separately. The 3 portions were not considered that way for your vote, but they should have been. The other industries affected by heavy truck and omnibus should fight their own fight. We're just here on our car and truck portion. You as board members were appointed to affect policy on air quality measures. It's clear that this rule has far-reaching effects beyond air quality, that it will affect every New Mexican socially and economically, not just car dealers and the thousands of employees in the automotive industry. The economic implications of the rule will force on all New Mexicans, will cause irreparable harm to many. Creating marketplace and economic rulings is not what this board was created for and not what your expertise is in. And I will say that the amount of time that I've spent watching this board operate, your expertise in environmental issues as a community member, I feel blessed that we have people as smart as you and as educated as you that are willing to spend their time on these boards regarding environmental issues. During our hearing, you heard speculative claim after speculative claim from NMED's so-called experts that were based on a myth. Both boards were led to believe that there was huge demand for EVs and this mandate was an easy move for the auto industry. The auto dealer's testimony was based on facts and real data. It's obvious now that we were right and our knowledge was vastly superior to the hired guns from out of state who didn't show you one piece of New Mexico specific data. I'm not here to rehash the hearing, just stating facts. In fact, they didn't even come to New Mexico before submitting their reports. The one indisputable fact in all of this is the EV market is flat. When we met 6 months ago, you heard people saying that it's going crazy and there's demand, and you heard from people from all these organizations saying that they're just flying off the shelves. It's totally untrue. As you heard from Ken's statistics, it's an absolute fact that that's not happening. Since our hearing, Toyota, Honda, General Motors, Ford, Volkswagen, and even Volvo have made massive cuts to their EV forecasts and spending. And what is the hottest segment in the industry right now? Hybrid vehicles, which is exactly what a lot of our testimony said. Hybrid is the great bridge that's going to help us to achieve better clean air quality. Toyota is the world's largest automaker, and their non-action in EVs lets us know that it's not a sustainable market for these vehicles. Toyota rarely makes a mistake. Their non-committal stance on EVs just tells me that they're going to pay the fine that's going to be imposed on them in these ZEV states and go down the road. Still, not one auto manufacturer is committed to participating in ACC2 as you were led to believe. We pointed this out during the hearing. The EPA has still not granted California's waiver for ACC2 after another 6 months. Why is this? They're waiting for the same thing that we all are, to see what happens. That's why they're dragging their feet. The longer we wait to right the wrongs of that this mandate contains, the more irreparable harm will be caused. No amount of money down the line is going to be able to fix the damage caused to thousands of businesses and tens of thousands of employees. When everyone sees that the 43% mandate is not achievable in any state, much less New Mexico, it will be too late. Auto manufacturing and distribution doesn't flip like a light switch, like you were told in the hearing. It'll take years to recalibrate and correct these market conditions. Without a doubt, the most baseless claim you were led to believe out of all of our hearings was that the EV incentives that our legislature was going to pass in this most recent session. That's all we heard over and over. We're going to do it. We're going to bring all these incentives. It's going to happen. Well, I will just tell you, I heard the governor say in July and October, we're going to pass huge EV incentives. I mean big. What did we get? Next to nothing. An embarrassing $3,000 incentive that's income restricted and capped at a new vehicle price that excludes 75% of the EV market, and not one pickup truck is actually eligible for New Mexico's incentive. When I was asked what it was taking to move EVs in New Mexico, I said 10,000 a car like they have in Colorado and California. I told legislators to ask for $15,000 and hope to get 10. Instead, we got virtually nothing. You were promised earth-shattering incentives on new EVs and used EVs and hybrid vehicles, and base your decision on those. I know my time's up. $3,000 on EVs, half of that on used cars, and nothing on hybrids. That doesn't sound earth-shattering to me. On top of that, if a customer qualifies, auto dealerships must float the $3,000 per EV sold until their next year's taxes come due. So we're floating $3,000 a car to the state of New Mexico. And so we become an interest-free bank and the tax collector. That's not at all what we were told during the hearings by New Mexico's employees. The utter failure by the governor and legislators to pass any meaningful EV incentive after all the promises to make both boards is a failure and an embarrassment. And it was totally misleading that the public was led onto these boards. So it's preposterous to think that ZEV sales are going to increase 1,000% here in 3 years and 2,000% in 5. I just ask that you grant our motion for a stay because this rule cannot be fixed while our appeal is pending, and the longer we wait to address its major flaws, the more irreparable harm that will be caused. Thank you for the extra time.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have another public commenter on.
Mr.
Item D.
Dominici signed up to speak on item E.
Madam Chair and members, I am expecting to be able to speak as counsel on items C and D. So I didn't sign up for public comment for those two items. But if I'm incorrect in that, I would like to.
Oh, this is separate than item C and D is what you're saying. Go ahead.
I'm talking about item E, which talks about discussion and possible action on a draft order from my motion to correct that was discussed at your last hearing. And I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to speak on that again. I spoke on it last week. So I wanted, and particularly Member Armijo, I think we had a real failure when that motion was heard. So my position is there was a clear mistake by applying a HAPS, best available control technology, to all HAP submissions from any stationary source in the entire county. I cited in my motion where Member Galuski had asked because there was a proposal to use these 16 HAPs during the discussion of Mr. Ebeline's motion. So Mr. Galuski asked, what is the scope of this? And the chair said, the scope is the EJ area and a 1 mile radius. So there was a question and an answer limiting that HAPS analysis specifically to the EJ area. The other point is, but what happened is we now have the most restrictive HAPS regulation in the United States. It applies to every one of those chemicals, regardless of the emission amount. There's no emission threshold, and it applies to every facility in this county. And I want to just quote what you indicated, Mr. Eberline, when you started down the process of trying to sort of put together the regulation. You specifically stated, so I think we should focus totally on dealing with environmental justice issues. This deliberation here and leave the HAPS for a future rulemaking if necessary. And that was your intent throughout the rulemaking. You didn't change that. You made no comments to change that. And you have now let your attorney write the regulation to put the most restrictive HAPS regulation in Bernalillo County. Not a single proposal ever proposed a countywide regulation. So nothing in the rulemaking proposed anything countywide. And then in this misinterpretation of the deliberations, all of a sudden we have a countywide, no threshold HAPS requirement. I just spoke to a facility that wants to locate to Bernalillo County. They asked, what are your air rules? I sent them your rule. They had their permit writers look at that and said, we don't face this in any jurisdiction in the United States. We are not in a position to put HAPS, to put best available control technology on these minimal HAPS activities that are part of our normal operations. We're not going to be able to consider Bernalillo County. And Member Armijo, your counsel advised last week you couldn't change that regulation, which is clearly needs to be corrected without a new rulemaking. She provided no path for the board members to fix this. I've looked at the rules. There are many rules that have errata in them. They don't go back through an entire rulemaking. You have under Rule 60 and New Mexico Supreme Court jurisdiction, the administrative bodies can correct their decision on their own motion or anybody else's motion at any time. There's no reason you should allow this gross mistake, this unfair mistake to continue. We had over 200 pleadings filed, probably several millions of dollars spent at that hearing, and there was not anything discussed of a countywide non-threshold HAPS emission. And the first time it appeared was in a draft statement of reasons that you didn't review. It was then put into a rule that was not reviewed and approved by this board. And I think when you come to that agenda item, you should be creative and fix this instead of saying, oh my gosh, we can't do it. One way to do it is tell your council when the appeal comes forward, we are not going to contest the portion that says this section of the rule is unsupported. We will not write a brief. We will not authorize you to argue and contest that because that is not our position. The other better way is to change the rule, file a notice of errata, change that regulation so it's not on the books while this appeal is pending, and you are allowed, members, even if your council won't tell you, to respond to my comments, and I suggest you do that. Ms. Richards took that opportunity last time. She couldn't cite anything in the record where she corrected Chair Paul, who confirmed Member Galuski's concern of the jurisdiction. There was no discussion after that saying, no, you're wrong, this is countywide. That comment was left unchanged, except your council chose to ignore it. So when this
So you
issue
know, your
comes to you,
time's also past 5 minutes, but we've been lenient with everyone on the time because I know we don't have a huge group here, so.
but when this
If you can
comes to
finish the
you, I
point.
urge you to fix this so you don't make really a mockery out of an environmental justice rulemaking and turn it into a HAPS regulation that we really can't live with in this county. Thank you.
Any other public comments? It says Jeremy Ho. Thank you, Mr. Demichi.
Yes, Madam Chair, we just had somebody raise their hand. Miss Jane Yee
Okay,
on Zoom.
Ms. Yee, if you would please state your name and affiliation for the record, and we've got your timer started.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of the board. I submitted a written comment before this meeting, and I don't know if you received a copy of it. And my written comment is similar to what I said last month during the open meeting in the second opportunity. But I saw afterward, or I heard the board talking about the possibility of the board taking action on item D, in other words, the motion for correction of adopted rules to accurately reflect the record, which Attorney Domenici just addressed. So that is the subject of my public comment, as it turns out. And I will go ahead and read it quickly, and then I have some additional comments based on what I just heard from Attorney Domenici. So what I wrote is I'm writing this public comment in opposition to the motion for correction of adopted rules, in other words, the HEEI, to accurately reflect the record. This motion was filed by Albuquerque Asphalt and some other industry entities on January 26, 2024. I respectfully urge the board to dismiss or deny this motion as this matter is currently before the Court of Appeals. In other words, the Air Board does not have the authority to consider or rule on the motion at this time while the rulemaking proceedings are pending consideration and orders, judgments or orders by the Court of Appeals. I'm writing this public comment on behalf of Cambio, an Albuquerque nonprofit organization that advocates for the political and cultural self-determination of working people and people of color. However, I said however, I meant to say however, because other people have already spoken to the motion in the last meeting. Cambio is here today to align its comments with those made by Mountain View Neighborhood Association, Friends of Valle del Oro, who are parties in this rulemaking, and by Sophia Martinez, who is also a party in this rulemaking through their respective attorneys, again, at the February open meeting. Most importantly, the trial court loses its jurisdiction of a matter upon the filing of an appeal. And I provided in my public comment, my written public comment, a case, just one case out of very, very many of the cases, published cases on this point. The one I cited is Martinez versus Martinez, and it's a 1984 case out of the Court of Appeals. As this case exemplifies, meaning Martinez versus Martinez, this termination of jurisdiction occurs upon the entry of a final judgment, or as is the case in this administrative proceeding, the final administrative decision. Further, as this case exemplifies against the Martinez versus Martinez case, the appellant waives any opportunities the appellant would have had to file requested findings and conclusions of law. That's what happened in the Martinez case. Or here, in this case, a quote, correction, close quote, to the final rule. Upon the filing, so this waiver occurs upon the filing of the final judgment, or again, in this case, upon the filing of the final rule and the filing of the appeal. So both those things have happened in this rulemaking. The final rule has been published, and the the movement has filed an appeal in the Court of Appeals. And as the Air Board's counsel, and I misspelled that, I'm sorry, as the Air Board's attorney pointed out in her comments at the February open meeting, this rulemaking is governed by the State Rules Act, NMSA 1978, Section 14-4-1 et sec. The act,
just so you know, you are over your 5 minutes, so if you can wrap up, like I said, it could give
okay.
some leeway here.
Well, I will say that the State Rules Act applies, and that the Rule 60 that Mr. Domenici keeps on bringing up does not apply. That's for setting aside things like default judgments when a court has jurisdiction and this agency does not have jurisdiction. And in wrapping up, I'm saying that I said last time, I'm trying to register my objection to industry trying to once again subvert and disrupt the orderly proceedings of an agency, and that the harm of industry acting in this way is hard to measure. That if the mistake is so obvious as Mr. Domenici is complaining, then the Court of Appeals will catch it and will correct it. And that what Mr. Domenici is complaining about is an application and interpretation of the record. And again, the Court of Appeals will correct that if that is blatantly off base.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yee.
And that again,
Just the last thought
hope
here.
that the board will deny the motion. I'm sorry to go long. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Ms. Estiermijo, do we have any more public comments?
No, Madam Chair, we have no more public commenters.
Okay, great. So we can now move on to our first item of business under item 5.
Chair Paul,
Action items.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Vice Chair Richards. I think the person who just gave public comment said she had a written statement. I don't know if I heard that correctly, but if so, is it possible for Ms. Estee Armijo to get that from her.
I think that it was sent in after office hours. Is that accurate?
Madam Chair, it was sent in, I believe, after I left the office to come over here and set up, so I haven't had a chance to forward it yet. So I will get it to you probably in the morning, if that works.
How does that sound, Vice Chair Richards?
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Item 5A, nominations of candidates for the office of Chair and Vice Chair for 2024 to 2025. That's our next item of business. I will now open the floor for nominations for the position of Chair for the next year, so April through April 2024 to 2025. Does anyone wish to make a nomination? Hearing none, I'll start with the nomination. I'd like to nominate Member Jablowski to chair for the next term. I think he'd be a great leader and has a ton of expertise in atmospheric science, which we all know. I think that you have to formally accept the nomination. So, Member Jablowski, do you accept the nomination to the position of chair?
Yes, thank you. I do respectfully accept the nomination.
Thanks. Great. Are there any other nominations for chair? Hearing none, I'll open up nominations now for the position of vice chair for 2024 to 2025. Does anyone wish to make a vice chair nomination?
Chair Paul, I'd like to nominate Member Judy Coleman as vice chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Richards. Member Coleman, do you accept the nomination for vice chair for 2024 to 2025?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Great. All right. Do we have any other nominations for the position of vice chair? All right. That makes that easy. Member Richards, you're Vice Chair Richards. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. Your hand is still up. Did you have any other nominations?
No, I'm sorry. I forgot to lower it.
Great. I'll now close the nominations for tonight. We'll conduct the election of the next month in accordance with the board's bylaws. Members will have the opportunity to make additional nominations from the floor prior to the election, from here prior to the election. If you last minute change your mind and want to be in a leadership role, good luck. And, I get to have fun. This is like one of my last ones. All right. Okay. Now we can move on to item B, our discussion of a meeting location change and possible action on amending our bylaws. So the location change, I think, would be to this meeting room, the basement hearing room at the Plaza del Sol. Opening up the floor to discussion on that.
Is there a problem continuing on this day? I mean, is it used up? But do we have to change? Is that the problem?
So our bylaws say that we meet at city council chambers, which we do not, and we have not been doing for a long time. I think this might be just a place for EHD to confirm that this location is reserved for the foreseeable future. I'm getting nods from at least 3 members of staff, so I'm going to take that as a yes. So this would mean just changing our bylaws. Let me see, which sections? Bylaws and resolution 1 and 2 be amended accordingly to say the official meeting location is here. Please, council has a comment.
Well, I just have a question. Is the intent to be clear that it's going to be here, or is it to open it up for flexibility? Because the bylaws were very clear that they were supposed to be at the chambers, and then we moved it here. Well, first there was, anyway, so there have been moves. And do you want to make the bylaws flexible so that they're at any facility that is located by EHD, or do you want to be specific that they'll be here, and then we'll have to kind of change the bylaws again if something happens and the board needs to move? It's just a question.
Any thoughts from members of the board on that? Member Armijo.
I would propose that we say that we're going to have it on a certain day here unless there's some sort of a conflict that we can move at our discretion, and that way we don't have to worry about it.
I would note one thing, which is the hybrid capability, and that is not something that's easy for, this may be what Catalina might discuss, is that it's hard for them to find locations that have this hybrid capability within cities, within the city, and or at least that's been my experience. So I would say if we were gonna say one location, specify this location, that if it were not held here, they would still have hybrid capabilities, or capacity or technology. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. So the draft of the language that is stricken out is shown above. That's the language in red, which refers to the council chambers. We're talking about.
Would you mind zooming in? Sorry to interrupt.
We're talking about Article 6 of bylaws meetings under item D. And the new language would state Plaza Sol Basement Hearing Room, 600 2nd Street, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And unless a meeting is moved to another location or time. So it already states that, so I think that's probably already answers the question, if we just take a direct look at the provision.
Thank you for saving us some time there.
Reading my mind.
Thank you.
Council.
Thank you. And that actually raises the question of whether it should say move to another location or time that has hybrid capability or hybrid capacity or something like that, if that's an issue.
I would add that language. I don't know what other board members think.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, I'm no longer with the Planning Commission. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm not certain that that is necessary. I think that this suffices with sufficient flexibility, saying unless the meeting is moved to another location or time, and that would certainly, I think, not need to specify. I mean, the meeting is held hybrid fashion, regardless of where it's held. And I wouldn't want to put anything on there that becomes too prescriptive.
Yeah, get too messy. I agree.
Anything from our members online? Any thoughts, discussion, questions? Hearing none. Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion to amend the bylaws to specify Plaza del Sol Basement Hearing Room, 600 2nd Street Northwest, Albuquerque, New Mexico, instead of the Vincent E. Griego Council Chambers?
I so move.
Moved by member Armijo. Is there a second?
I second that.
Seconded by member Eberline. Any further discussion? So that would move for our regular meeting date. Sorry, not the regular meeting date. The bylaws amended to specify this location. I think I have some holdover language. Yeah. Right. Great. Okay, Mrs. Armijo, would you please call the roll?
Member Armijo,
Yes.
Member Cowman,
Yes.
Member Eberline,
Yes.
Member Galuski,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Chair Paul.
Yes, the motion passes unanimously, 6 yes, 0 no, and 0 absent. Although there is one board seat open. Okay, great, Ms. Cedillo Lopez, will you prepare the amended bylaws for my signature?
Well, it looks like they've already been prepared.
That's true.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So I think if you just.
I guess
provided-
will EHD send me them for signature?
Absolutely. So EHD can send them.
Great. Okay, we can move on to item C. I think I'm going to call our break now instead of at 7 because this may take more than 15 minutes. So why don't we come back at 5 to the hour? All right, thanks.
To get some nutrition.